Hey, I keep saying that pay by result is the way modern software development has to be done. The traditional approach now is pay by the time, meaning that programmers sit in the office or home, and no matter what they do, they get the money for the time they spend in front of the computers. This, I think, is a counterproductive model because the motivation of those programmers is not focused on delivering results and making the final end user happy with the product they create, but actually making the management happy and satisfy the direct boss who is responsible for cutting those paychecks for the time you spend in the project or in the office. This sounds obvious to me, and if you have doubts, you can read many of the articles on my blog about modern slavery in software development. But now it is not the point. The point is that people very often ask me when they hear about this concept of pay by result, who is going to estimate the work upfront? If you want to pay me by result, then somebody has to tell us, or we have to agree somehow, how much that result will cost. And we all know that estimating work in software development is a very painful, very expensive, and in most cases useless process. We don't know upfront how much software will cost. No matter how much time we spend on those estimates and how much of those estimate poker we play, we still don't know how much time and how much lines of code it will require to create the product we're looking for. Fixed cost contracting, which is quite popular in government contracts, in large software projects, is a disaster. We all know that. Because when we estimate everything up front, we put a fixed cost on our contract, then the team is most of the time not writing code, but actually fighting with the client to protect the scope, to make sure that when the scope is changed, we go through the change management process. We create a change request, then we get the change request approved by the change control board or whatever it is in the project. And then when the change is approved, then only at that point of time we allow the scope to get bigger or to get smaller. It is expensive and it's very risky for the client of the project because the client will be against the team. They will not have the same objectives. They will not have the same motivation to complete the project. They will be enemies all the time. Even if it's one single programmer, if it's one person who you outsource some work to and you contract that person, and still it's impossible to make a fixed cost contract because, like I said again, the scope is unclear, the requirements are not defined pretty well up front, and clients, most of the time, they don't know what they want to create. All they know is the problem they're trying to solve. And the problem is defined in some vague terms, in some very short document, which they sometimes call the vision of the project or sometimes requirements, but it's still not a detailed software requirements documentation down to the level of a single class or a single functional or non-functional requirement. It's a general description of a problem. And then the responsibility of the team or a single programmer is to go deeper and work together with the client, fetch the requirements from the client or from the end users, understand what they need, and then according to that requirements, implement some code. And then, based on the code implemented, based on some prototyping created, then clients will be able to tell us what's needed more and what's the next step. And if we are bounded by a fixed price contract, that will be very difficult for us to be flexible. And that will seriously affect the end result of the entire project. So when there is a fixed cost contract, and programmers constantly have to defend themselves. And by defending themselves, they hurt the project and they hurt the client. Why they behave like that? Because the risk is huge, the risk of losing money. I'm a programmer and I would never take a project of, say, $50,000 budget when I know that the budget will be paid when I complete everything. because the risk is huge. The client may not be happy in the end of the project. The client may misunderstand requirements. I may spend way more time to implement it. It's just the amount of risk I cannot tolerate. It's too much for me. And no serious programmer will do that. If any programmer tells you that they are ready to accept a fixed cost contract with a large amount of money, with some small upfront, with some down payment upfront, and then the rest when the project is complete, most likely you deal with either people who don't understand what they do, they're just junior developers, they just need money whenever they can take them, or you deal with somebody who understands pretty well the scope and they know that the actual amount of time they will spend will be way less than the price on the contract. In both cases, you as a client will lose. So now get back to the question. So how can I preach for pay by result if we all know that fixed cost contracting is a disaster and it's not a recipe for success? The only solution is microtasking. If we are able to break down a larger scope of $50,000 into smaller elements of $50 each, and then outsource those 1,000 elements to programmers and make sure that they get the money for results they deliver, but the results are small, the results are micro, and there are thousands of those micro results, then it's good for us as a client, and it's perfect for programmers as performers of those tasks, because in that case the risk is way lower for both parties. Programmer doesn't risk a lot for $50 a task. If I complete that task, I get $50. If I don't complete it, I don't get $50. It's not a big deal for me if I have many of those tasks in the pipeline, because if I'm a good programmer, most likely I will be able to complete most of them. So sometimes I may lose a few out of a dozen. That's not a big deal. I can tolerate that risk. I cannot tolerate the risk of losing $50,000, but I can tolerate the risk of losing $50. You may ask who's going to estimate those tasks, those micro tasks. I think that when tasks are micro, when they're so small, there's no need to estimate at all. You just put, like we do in zerocracy, we just put a fixed budget on each task and we never negotiate it with programmers. We just say, this task is $50 for you. You like it, you take it. You don't like it, you just reject it, we give it to somebody else. And that's it. People sometimes reject, but in most cases, they just accept it and implement them. You may ask, who's going to break the large scope into micro tasks? So who will do that work of looking at the large scope of $50,000 and then deciding which are those 1,000 tasks which can be outsourced to programmers? That's a very serious work. It's a huge amount of work to do that. So the question is, who will do that? We use puzzle-driven development for that. That's a methodology which we invented many years ago, and we have been using it for many projects up to date, and we keep using it in all our projects in Zerocracy. I'm not going to explain how it works, but you can read the articles on my blog and watch a few videos on this YouTube channel to find out more about puzzle-driven development. My point now is that if you want to stop paying people by time, which is a modern form of slavery, I believe, and you want to start paying them by result they deliver, you have to find a way of implementing microtasking in your projects. How you will do that, I don't know. It's up to you. It's up to your management skills and qualifications. You can use Zerocracy. You can work with us. We give you the software for that. We give you everything which we created, and you just rent it from us and use it in your project. Or you can try to implement it yourself. However, if you don't do microtasking, it will not be possible to do pay by result. You will still have to pay for the time your programmers spend in your project. You will lose. Programmers will be not motivated. In the end, most likely your projects will suffer a lot. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.